A reading from John chapter 6, verses 35 and 48 through 51. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh.
Lori and I overheard a cable news commentator talking recently about the need for the presidential candidates to start addressing the issues that, quote, families are talking about around their kitchen tables every night. When Lori looked at me and said, how many families actually still eat together at the kitchen table every night? And I'll admit, she was onto something. With the youngest of our 3 kids in college now, we're pretty much empty nesters, but even when all 3 kids were in the house, it was nearly impossible to eat dinner together as a family, with endless baseball practices, swim practices, games, tournaments, carpools, conferences, doctor's appointments, back to school nights, plays, youth group events, extracurriculars, church meetings, not to mention the times that Lori and I would lock ourselves in a closet to pray that we could just make it through one more night without losing our minds. I honestly can't say we had a lot of family dinners together around our kitchen table. And on those rare nights that we did, I do not ever remember sitting down at the kitchen table and saying, all right, kiddos, now that we're all finally here, how are you really feeling about the American economy right now? What are your thoughts really about immigration or healthcare? According to one recent study, less than 50% of family dinners are eaten together. Another study found that the average American only has 3 dinners a week with their families. But in neither study was it clear whether a kitchen table was actually involved. And yet we do know that there is a direct link between communal eating and our well-being. When we eat with others, it's not just about the food. We are happier and healthier in every way. It's actually in our DNA. Our earliest ancestors gathered around a fire pit and they shared a communal meal and they told stories to make sense of their lives. But in the modern world, it's more common for us to gather around a TV screen and to eat alone and to have a story told to us, often to escape our lives that do not make any sense at all. Maybe Andy Warhol captured it best when he said, I want to start a chain of restaurants for other people like me, where you get your food and then you take your tray into a booth and watch television. Food is more than something simply to be consumed, which is why when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, it's hard for us moderns sometimes to understand the power of that statement apart from its present-day consumeristic connotations. When we think of bread today, we probably think of it primarily as food to be consumed. Most of us probably have loaves of bread in our pantries right now. Sliced bread, English muffins, bagels, hot dog buns, hamburger buns, brioche buns, baguettes, banana bread. We are gluttons for gluten, aren't we? Bread is the oldest, most basic food staple in human civilization. Humans have been making bread for 30,000 years. Without bread, humans wouldn't have survived, and civilization wouldn't have spread across continents, and diverse cultures wouldn't have evolved. Bread it's the one universal food that exists in every country around the world. Bread is so ordinary, universal, and necessary And we can easily think of it as simply a means to an end, a thing to be consumed, biologically necessary for our survival. And so when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, we might also easily assume he means something as transactional as that, as if Jesus too is simply a means to some greater end. It's common for many people to think of Jesus this way. And the logic goes something like this. In the same way that you can't live this life without daily bread, you can't have eternal life without Jesus. So we might think, receive Jesus into your life in this world now, and you'll make it safely into the next world when this life is over. It's a very transactional way of believing in Jesus, but it's not what Jesus meant when he called himself the bread of life. There were a lot of people who came to Jesus in his day who saw him transactionally as just a means to an end. And it all began when Jesus pulled off this seemingly impossible one day by feeding a crowd of 5,000 starving people with just 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. It was a miracle intended as an act of pure love. A miracle more than some public display of divine power, really. Jesus wasn't trying to show off. He truly felt deep compassion for a crowd of desperate, hungry people. And so he just made sure they were fed. And we don't know how he did it. The details are few and far between, but it turned out to be such an act of such an impressive nature. And the word traveled so quickly that Jesus could no longer go anywhere after that event without attracting a huge following of people. And what were they asking of him now? After performing that miracle with the loaves and fishes, what did they all come looking for over and over again now? It's the strangest thing. They kept following him now because they wanted more bread. It's almost as if instead of falling in love with the one who performed the miracle, they fell in love with the miracle itself, and they wanted more of that. They had Jesus in their very midst, and of all they could have asked of him, of all he could have given them to satisfy their deepest longings in life, of all he could have offered to them, peace, consolation, wonder, forgiveness, liberation, they asked for, of all things, more bread. Is that not the strangest thing? And is that not also the saddest thing about us humans? Give me what I want, not what I really need. Give me what I crave in this moment, not what will satisfy me. Give me more of that tasty miracle bread, Jesus. David Lodge wrote a best-selling novel back in the 90s entitled Therapy, about a man, Lawrence Passmore, who's so deeply unhappy that he immerses himself in all kinds of therapy. He's in psychotherapy, aromatherapy, physiotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy, acupuncture therapy. His psychiatrist has him write down a list of all the things that are right about his life and all the things that are wrong. On the things right side, he lists professionally successful, well-off, good health, stable marriage, kids successfully launched into adult life, nice house, great car. On the things wrong side, he lists just one thing. I am unhappy most of the time. The truth is, it's often hard to know the difference between our wants and our needs. We all want success and stability, good health, nice things. And Jesus certainly would not argue that any of these things inherently belong on the things wrong column. But maybe the source of so much unhappiness we experience today is that we often make these ultimate things. So much so that everything we do in our lives becomes just a means to an end to get them. Sometimes our work, our relationships, our faith, our prayers, our conversations with others, they can all be so transactional, just means to get us what we want. And it's hard then to be our true selves, our real selves, whenever we do that. When Jesus reveals himself as the bread of life, we can think of him as something to just be consumed, as a means to an end, as so many in his day saw him, and so many today still do. Back then, Jesus was seen as a bread machine, a miracle worker who could give them another miracle to get through another day. And today, for many, Jesus is just a divine hall pass to get them from this world to the next, an eternal life insurance policy for the faithful believer. But Jesus wants to be so much more than that. He tells the crowd, "I'm not your manna machine." Manna was considered miracle bread for the Israelites when they were lost in the wilderness. For 40 years, the wandering Israelites had no other food source except for this fine flake-like thing that appeared on the ground like the dew every morning. The Israelites called it manna. It was meant, what is it, or what's this? Man who? They would grind and pound it into cakes and then either bake it with oil or eat it raw with honey. Manna got old in the wilderness, 3 squares of manna a day, every day for 40 years. The Israelites complained about it, but it got them through the wilderness alive. Only later would they really come to appreciate it as miracle bread. But do you know what's really funny about manna? Bedouins still live in the area where the Israelites wandered for 40 years. This same flaky substance called manna in the Bible, it still appears there in that area today. And scientists believe it's probably not so miraculous after all. Manna probably comes from a very specific kind of plant lice, which infests the tamarisk shrubs of the Sinai Peninsula, and then overfeed on the shrub's sap, and then excrete the excess carbohydrates and sugar. In case you're not quite following this, there's a high probability that manna, God's gift from heaven, is actually produced by bug excretions. Jesus tells the crowds, "I'm not your manna machine." Instead, he says, "I am the living bread. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." If that sounds strange, even a little cannibalistic, it's really just Jesus' way of saying, if you're hungry, not for bug excrement now, but if you're really hungry, then I'm all in with you. If you're hungry for something real, then I'm throwing my whole self into this for you. This isn't transactional, it's relational. It's not about giving you some thing. It's about giving you myself. When was the last time you were really hungry? Not tummy rumbling, arm gnawing, I could eat a horse kind of hungry. I'm talking now about the other kind of hungry. The hunger to be seen for who you really are and not just for how you look kind of hungry. The hunger to be loved for who you are and not just for what you do kind of hungry. The hunger to be deeply known for what's in your heart and not just for what's on your resume or on your Facebook page or what's in your bank account kind of hunger. That's a deeper, more painful kind of hunger. And so many people are dying of that kind of hunger in the modern world. Mother Teresa once said, even the rich are hungry for love, for being cared for being wanted, for having someone to call their own. Being unwanted, unloved, uncared for, forgotten, she said, that's a much greater hunger, a much greater poverty than the person who has nothing to eat. Our deepest hungers are more than physical. We have emotional, spiritual, and relational hungers far more powerful than our physical hunger. They all long for a kind of bread that will not fail us. And when Jesus calls himself the living bread, he invites us to pattern our lives according to his life and to feast on his life. And when we feed on this living bread, we find strength and sustenance from a completely different, never-ending, renewable source, so that we can live more now for the needs of others and less out of our own wants, and have more to give away and less of a need now or a desire to take from others or to consume others or to use others for our own gain. Because to feed on this living bread of Jesus means feeding on the one who emptied himself of everything but love on love's behalf. It means losing our life to find it. It means becoming bread that chooses, like Jesus, to be blessed, broken, and given for the world. I think that's why we gather in church. I think that's the whole purpose of being the church. To feast together on the living bread, that we might become bread like him for the world to be feasted upon. The Christian community is meant to become that living bread in and for the world. But there's always this temptation for churches to become manna machines instead, to turn Jesus and salvation into a mere transaction, to try to satisfy the world's deep spiritual hunger with bug excretions, instead of offering the real, honest, vulnerable presence of Jesus. So as we strive to embody that real presence of Jesus in the world, I want to leave you with this last image of what I believe Jesus had in mind for us as a community deeply committed to being living bread. It's from the 1999 rom-com film Notting Hill. In that film, William Thacker, played by Hugh Grant, is this London bookstore owner whose humdrum existence is thrown into romantic turmoil when the famous American actress Anna Scott, played by the beautiful Julia Roberts, appears in his bookshop. It's a predictable plot, right? This chance encounter blossoms into a full-blown affair. Average guy, glamorous movie star. They struggle to reconcile their radically different lifestyles in the name of love, but somehow they make it work. But there's this beautiful scene that I think looks a lot like church to me, or what church should look like. In that scene, William takes Anna to his sister's birthday dinner. And at the end of that dinner, all the guests have to compete in this little game called the last brownie. And they go around the table, and each guest has to tell a sad, honest story about themselves. And the guest with the saddest story wins the last brownie. So they each share about their personal struggles with sickness, failed marriage, unsuccessful careers, appearances, and self-worth. Bernie works at a job he doesn't understand, and he doesn't have a girlfriend, and he's getting chubbier. Honey thinks she's unattractive and confesses that she's attracted to cruel men. Belle is in a wheelchair, and she can't have a baby. William is unsuccessful, divorced, and he has a very unfortunate nickname from school. And then Anna, the movie star, speaks. She confesses that her beauty isn't natural and that it's cost her millions to get her looking like this. That she's had a boyfriend who hit her. And that she's been on a diet since she was 19, which means she's been hungry for a decade. And that she's afraid that someday her looks will go and the tabloids will say that she can't act and she'll be forgotten by a once adoring public. And there's this stunned, awkward silence around the table suddenly until one of them, Max, says, "Nice try, gorgeous." And then they all laugh, and then William says, "Pathetic effort to hog the brownie." Isn't that the kind of bread we really need? Isn't that the kind of bread that Jesus offers us that we cannot live without? "I am the bread of life," he says, "and whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." Our takeaways for today: there is a much greater hunger than having nothing to eat. The bread of life is less about the food and more about the feast. The more we feast with Jesus, the more we become like him.